Fragile empires in Terra Nostra. Incredible, the first animal that dreamed of another animal. Monstrous, the first vertebrate that succeeded in standing on 2 feet and thus spread terror among the beasts still normally and happily crawling close to the ground through the slime of creation. Astounding, the first telephone call, the first boiling water, the first song, the first loincloth. Join us today as we examine the historical repetition of declining empires in Carlos Fuentes' Terra Nostra. I'm your host, Bob. Now please, sit back and enjoy today's edition of Lit Tips. Part historical fiction, part mythology, and part political statement, Terra Nostra is not an easy novel to define. It is a book so densely packed with weighty concepts and ideas that any sort of condensed synopsis can quickly become unwieldy in and of itself. Nevertheless, here's an attempt. Terra Nostra documents the construction of El Escorial, a massive palace and monastery that to this day can be found outside of Madrid. Designed to serve not just as a home for the royals and a center of monarchical power, it will also house the remains of all of Spain's previous rulers, their bones and belongings to be transported to a colossal mausoleum as construction progresses. The unprecedented project is overseen by King Philip II, referred to in the novel by the moniker El Señor. El Escorial is intended to define his legacy. Devoutly religious like any good medieval monarch, the palace will not only be a reflection of Philip's own unquestionable faith, but it will also be a testament to the people of God himself having ordained him as the rightful ruler of the known world. Fuentes compares and contrasts Philip with leaders of the past who shared similar sentiments about themselves. At one point, Philip discovers a translation of a letter written by a scribe employed by Tiberius Caesar. He recounts an incident in which Caesar, convinced of his absolute control over his empire, challenged a group of emissaries to go to its most obscure forgotten corners. Their goal was to prove to him that his rule was felt just as strongly there as it was in Rome itself. One emissary is sent to a particularly unremarkable backwater, a province Caesar himself has trouble placing, Judea. The emissary returns, and in a manner indebted to Bulgakov's depiction of Pontius Pilate in The Master and Margarita, brings with him news of a small group of fanatics stirring up trouble following the martyrdom of their leader. Caesar responds with grim amusement, gleefully pressing for details on the punishments exacted on those associated with the movement. To him, the early Christians are no different from any other gang of radicals seeking to change the status quo. He has no reason to suspect that the tables will soon begin to turn, that their doctrine will not only supersede his own in the coming centuries, but that it will be used by subsequent rulers like Philip to justify their own unshakable worldviews. Certainly, in Philip's eyes, the rulers of antiquity were delusional. They believed in pagan nonsense and had not yet been made to see the divine light of the one true creator. The Christian Revolution and fall of Rome were where mankind began to realize the truth, that the driving force in the lives of every man, woman, and child is to serve God and those appointed by him to keep things in line on earth. It is a doctrine that cannot be challenged, that has a logical response and counterpoint for any arguments brought against it. The world Philip finds himself in will only change in the sense that it will further fall under his own infallible influence. There is nothing that can possibly happen that would convince anyone otherwise. Until something does happen. A mysterious traveler visits the court of Philip, insisting that he will only speak to the king directly. He proceeds to tell a baffling story of his treacherous visit to, and harrowing return from, a previously undiscovered land across the ocean. It is inhabited by a civilization that has no inkling of the existence of Christianity, let alone the Spanish Empire or Philip himself. It is a continent of pagans entirely different and unrecognizable from those that populated Europe centuries before. Their way of life, with its strange deities and enthusiastic penchant for human sacrifices, is an affront to everything Philip and his people have ever believed. While Fuentes doesn't ever show us the absolute leaders of this society, it is a safe bet that they view themselves as being just as untouchable as Philip and Caesar before him. In short order, a campaign of conquest is launched on the new continent, a campaign that brings incalculable riches to the empire. Many of these riches are poured into adding still more excessive flourishes to El Escorial. But with military resources stretched thin half a world away, domestic troubles begin to arise within the empire. Philip is beset by enemies on all sides, not least by his conspiring subject, Guzman, and an enigmatic mystical woman named Celestina who somehow seems to know the fate to which Philip is resigned. All that was left to me was certain images, and all of them spoke to me on the collapse of a cruel world and the slow construction in its stead of another world, equally cruel. This is merely a cursory glance that doesn't quite do justice to the immense scope of Fuentes' novel. With this historical foundation as his starting point, Fuentes freely incorporates elements of magical realism, mythology, theology, and intertextuality. Characters die only to be reincarnated. The mysterious traveler details his meetings with the deities of the Aztec Empire, Plumed Serpent and Smoking Mirror. And a scribe takes on the challenge of documenting local tales of a mad knight who believes himself to be a hero of chivalric legend. Furthermore, characters familiar to readers of the works of Julio Cortázar, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and other Latin American writers unexpectedly pop into the narrative. And allusions to filmmakers like Luis Buñuel show Fuentes' attempt to condense centuries of European American culture into his narrative. The environment Fuentes depicts is in many ways a modernized version of the myths of the ancient world. It goes beyond mere magical realism in its depiction of world-altering events through a lens that is filtered in equal parts by admiration and revulsion. The sheer scale of Philip's ambition for El Escorial has the same exaggerated reverence imparted upon it as can be found in documents of earlier rulers like the Aeneid. Simultaneously, though, Fuentes observes Philip the same way Philip observes Tiberius Caesar, as a man so blinded by his power and wealth that he is oblivious to the fact that he and all he knows will soon be crushed under the merciless wheels of history. One final aspect of the book that I've yet to touch on is its framing device. Bookending the novel are two sections detailing Fuentes' vision of the apocalypse, roughly set in 1975 when the book was published. The 1970s saw many concerned parties voicing their fears of the effects of overpopulation on the planet's resources. They believed that catastrophic food shortages and economic collapse lay just over the horizon if the population continued to grow at its current pace. Their worries, at least of immediate disaster, were averted, with today's population nearly double what it was in the 1970s. Instead, a whole new array of unforeseeable issues in addition to the risk of overpopulation have cropped up, but that's a discussion for another video. Fuentes' apocalyptic imagery is regardless still striking. He describes a situation of full-on global panic, with each nation taking extreme measures to combat oversized populations before it's too late. Brazil stages an unending Carnival celebration, encouraging citizens to party until they die of exhaustion. The Soviets distribute Trotskyist literature amongst the populace, only to turn around and execute any dissidents found with the same material. And the governments of several third world countries take a hands-off approach, leaving their citizens to starve. Incredibly bleak, I know, but there is something to be learned by the modern reader. The novel, with its recurring themes of looking back on the past with the benefit of contemporary knowledge, can be approached with this same critical eye. Philip writes off Caesar as a product of his time. Likewise, the apocalyptic world of the novel's present does the same to him. And readers coming to the novel today will no doubt be tempted to follow the same example when encountering Fuentes' vision of doomsday. That being said, this knowledge shouldn't interfere with one's enjoyment of the novel, just as contemporary viewpoints should never be used to blindly discount any work of art. The key takeaway here, given the themes of the book, is that we should do what Philip fails to do. He mocks those who live in the unenlightened past, but doesn't have a shred of self-awareness that he himself is subject to the same unexpected, chaotic turns of fate as his predecessors. He makes no effort to learn from those he subjects to derision. Were Fuentes' concerns at the time of his writing the book overblown? In a sense, yes. But the issue becomes more complicated when we see how many of the problems Fuentes and his contemporaries foresaw have arisen in different forms in the decades since. Things didn't play out exactly as they had envisioned, but many of their concerns have mutated into the most pressing problems the world finds itself wrestling with today. With the benefit of hindsight, we can read books like Terra Nostra knowing that their predictions didn't come to pass, while still appreciating and hopefully learning something from the sentiments with which they were written. Nothing is permanent, not empires, not nations, and not rulers. We would all be wise to remember this, to learn from the past so as to avoid repeating its mistakes, and to avoid trapping ourselves in mindsets like Philip's, selfishly believing that we have all the answers and that everything will be just fine if we maintain the status quo. Since I neither want nor can influence the events of the world, my mission is to preserve the internal integrity and equilibrium of my mind. That will be the manner in which I recover the purity of the original act. I shall be my own citadel, and to it I shall retire to protect myself against a hostile and corrupt world. I shall be my own citadel, and, within it, my own and only citizen. We hope that you enjoyed this edition of Lit Tips. As always, hit that like button if you like what we're doing, subscribe for more videos on literature from your favorites to the plain obscure, hit that bell if you want to be notified when videos drop, and leave a comment with your thoughts on this video, along with suggestions for any books or authors you would like us to cover in future episodes. Until next time, keep reading.